showed us all is all about. The American sons and daughters who saw us to victory were no less extraordinary in peace. They built families, they built industries, they built a national culture that inspired the entire world. In the decades that followed, America defeated communism, secured civil rights, revolutionized science, launched a man to the moon, and then kept on pushing to new frontiers. And today, America is stronger than ever before. Seven decades ago, the warriors of D-Day fought a sinister enemy who spoke of a 1,000-year empire. In defeating that evil, they left a legacy that will last not only for 1,000 years, but for all time. For as long as the soul knows of duty and honor, for as long as freedom keeps its hold on the human heart. To the men who sit behind me and to the boys who rest in the field before me, your example will never, ever grow old. Your legend will never die. Your spirit, brave, unyielding, and true, will never die. The blood that they spilled, the tears that they shed, the lives that they gave, the sacrifice that they made, did not just win a battle. It did not just win a war. Those who fought here won a future for our nation. They won the survival of our civilization. And they showed us the way to love, cherish, and defend our way of life for many centuries to come. Today, as we stand together upon this sacred earth, we pledge that our nation will forever be strong and united. We will forever be together. Our people will forever be bold. Our hearts will forever be loyal. And our children and their children will forever and always be free. May God bless our great veterans. May God bless our allies. May God bless the heroes of D-Day. And may God bless America. Thank you. Thank you very much.
President Trump here in Normandy, France, standing before survivors of D-Day, embracing President Macron of France right there, telling those World War II veterans you are the pride of the nation, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. He also talked about the 9,388 young Americans who rest beneath the beautiful grounds here, as he said, each adopted by a French family.
En l'honneur de la mémoire de ceux qui ont consenti l'ultime sacrifice au service de la France et des États-Unis, le président de la République française et le président des États-Unis vont maintenant déposer une gerbe, puis observer un moment de silence.
Ouais, faut le dire à Arthur.
course, now they prepare for the wreath laying and then a moment of silence. And the president saying, as he stands before those veterans right there behind him, these men will tell you that they are the lucky ones. All of the heroes are actually buried here. But he said those men saved freedom, and they showed us when they came home what freedom is all about.
Seated as Presidents Macron and President Trump greet the World War II veterans.
President Trump and the First Lady, Melania Trump, President Macron and Brigitte Macron greeting those D-Day survivors and World War II veterans on the stage behind them. And Terry Moran, who's watching here with me in Normandy, it is hard not to be moved by those stories and those D-Day survivors who stood up after President Trump shared their stories.
You know, it's so beautiful, David, to hear both President Macron and President Trump in these speeches try to take us back, try to take us all back to when these men were young men, heroes, boys in some ways, and put ourselves in their place as they stormed the beaches and fought their way to Germany. And to hear those individual stories was very powerful. I think this is one of the most significant speeches that President Trump has given, because he wove out of those individual stories his vision of what America First means to him. In the inauguration, he talked about it, about what needed to be repaired, the American carnage. That was a very controversial way of putting it. This is what can be achieved if we can return to those traditions that he believes in. The boldness, the loyalty, and loyalty to allies as well. I think this speech will go down in his presidency as a statement of his vision based on what those heroes did of what America can be.
But as you point out, Terry, he talked about the age of these men who now stand behind him on that stage, who now accept his embrace, his handshake with smiles on their faces. They were 18, 19, 20 years old. Many of them had yet to get married. Some were newly married. Some left before they even had a chance to start families, knowing that the fate awaited them, an uncertain fate, in fact. But he also said that our bond is unbreakable. Terry, as you said, taking advantage of this opportunity on a world stage to talk about relationships, and one that he will continue to be committed to with President Macron.
In his way, based on his vision, which is not Macron's vision, but certainly that emotion, that bond and solidarity between the United States and France and the rest of Europe, he touched on that. And just on a personal note, when he made that point about young soldiers getting married before they shipped off, that's what my dad did. He served in World War II, and my mom and dad, they got married 2 weeks before he shipped off to the Pacific Theater, Okinawa and the Philippines. I think because they wanted to be together before perhaps he fought and died. And that was true of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young men and young women. And I think it was very touching to me to hear President Trump articulate that almost unnoticed aspect of heroism, one act of love before they shipped out.
Well, we salute your father, too, here this morning, Terry. I know you lost him when you were young, and in talking about these soldiers who were so young, you know, many of them here in our conversations with them have shared with us the mementos they saved. And Martha Raddatz, who's been listening with us all morning long, our Chief Global Affairs Correspondent. Martha, one soldier shared with me the letter he wrote to his mother. He said, "Dear Mom," and this was just days after D-Day, he said, perhaps I should let you know I'm in France. But he said, I have to leave the bloody details to Leo, which was his brother. He thought at the time descriptions of war were only something he could share with his brother. There was so much protecting, even at such a young age. These young men wanted to protect their families back home, their mothers back home, their young wives back home from the horrors that they had witnessed here.
And that is still the same today, David. It is something they can share with those who shared it with them, and very few others. Very few people can ever understand what these men went through. We're all learning more about that today. You heard President Trump say that fathers died who would never meet their sons and daughters, wave after wave coming on that beach. Those who fought here want a future for our nation, and I could not stop looking at the faces of those men and thinking of the pride or the healing, as you said earlier, the healing that events like this bring to them, coming back to where they fought. You know, they do that sometimes today. They try to take young soldiers back to the battlefields. It's obviously very, very difficult to go back to Afghanistan or Iraq and see where it fought or lost others. But it is such a powerful and profound moment for those soldiers to go back and to remember and to bond with those who they fought with.
You know, they have earned this day, and it's wonderful to witness. It is powerful to witness, and many of us standing here wish it hadn't taken 75 years for many of them to feel this moment of closure. But we certainly welcome it for them, those who've made the trip for the first time. We just saw our friend Harold McMurrin there with a smile on his face. He was the one in the lower right corner of your screen there smiling at President Macron. And he was the one who thought at the last minute, do I really want to go? Told me yesterday he's glad he came. Then there was Harold Himmelsbach, who came as well. He was the one who protected his mother all those years ago. He actually has to get home after this ceremony. He will mark his 70th wedding anniversary, and I told Harold that I hope somebody's doing the planning for you. You've got your hands full here, marking D-Day. And Cokie Roberts, who has been listening with us for our coverage as well. Cokie, you know, Harold told me himself that he's 93, turning 94. He guesses this is the last time he'll be here. And he said, I know the ranks are growing smaller and smaller. We lose more than 300 World War II veterans in the United States every year, every day.
It's true, and you know, one of the things that we are privileged to see in Washington is the World War II veterans coming to the new memorial that's been built in honor of the people who fought in that war, and fewer and fewer of them obviously can come. But you know, I was struck with listening to what Terry was talking about his dad. When we were growing up in America in the 1950s, every house, there was not a house that you went into that did not have men in uniform in pictures all around the house, because that's who they were. Everybody had fought in that war, and everybody had sacrificed for the war in our country. And what you heard today was not only tributes to the men who did that, and some women. I should point out there are 4 women buried in that beautiful cemetery, including African-American female soldiers. But what the vision and the meaning of this day is clearly very different to our 2 presidents. And President Trump did talk about American strength and how America went forward from there to be this very strong nation that could put a man on the moon and all of that. Whereas President Macron talked about the promise of Normandy. And to him, the promise of Normandy was a world united, where people came together as they did fighting on those fields. And he talked about the institutions created as a result of that, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and yes, the European Union, something that President Trump has railed against. It is a vision that is born out of that place, out of that sacred ground, but 2 very different visions.
Koki, I'm watching President Macron now make his way through a sea of American World War II veterans, those D-Day survivors, and they have giant smiles. And I'll tell you, the veterans here have shared the same story over and over, how moved they are by the gratitude they sense from the French. We know back home the pride we have in America for our World War II veterans, but when they come here to France and to Normandy, they hear from the French right away, thank you. Thank you for what you did 75 years ago. We saw Onofrio Zakari there a moment ago, one of the gentlemen that we have followed. He was so happy, had his hand on the shoulder of the French president, President Macron, who surely was thanking the American veterans for what they did. They now prepare for that wreath laying and a moment of silence after what has been a powerful and in many ways joyful ceremony.
Please rise and remain standing as we salute those whose final resting place is this hallowed ground.
Veuillez vous lever et restez debout alors que l'on salue ceux dont la dernière demeure est celle de la famille.
Again.
President Trump and the First Lady, President Macron and Brigitte Macron, they will leave the stage area. They're going to be walking towards Omaha Beach. And there you have it, the 21-gun salute.
Please be seated while the official party moves to the orientation map at the Overlook.
They will now make their way to Omaha Beach. It's extraordinary to think of the numbers when you think back to Omaha Beach. Of course, there were several beaches that were stormed that morning 75 years ago. 34,250 Americans landed on Omaha Beach. Only 2 of the 29 amphibious tanks even made it to land using their own power because of the mine explosions and the incoming fire that they faced at Omaha. And when you see the beach and you see those cliffs, Koki, it really gives you profound respect for what those 18-year-olds, those 19-year-olds accomplished.
Right. It's, I mean, we keep using the word extraordinary because it was. And the fact that they survived at all is remarkable. And then that they were able to do what they did. I mean, it is totally true that what they did was liberate Europe. Think about it. I mean, think what Hitler had done, how much he had taken over the continent. And among other things, that day, D-Day, hastened the liberation of the concentration camps. And people were saved there as well. I mean, coming up those cliffs, those sheer cliffs, with machine gun fire coming down on you and landmines exploding around you, saved the world.
A poignant moment here in Normandy has been the whole morning here as we've watched the world pay tribute to World War II veterans who changed the course of history. They're looking out over Omaha Beach. Of course, we listened to Tapped. There will be a flyover to come. These 2 world leaders standing together as they told the crowd and the world watching. President Macron saying, "Today, France has not forgotten what happened 75 years ago this morning, remembering the more than 100,000 troops who stormed these beaches," and he thanked them. President Trump telling the American veterans who were standing behind him that you don't like to call yourself heroes, that you often say the heroes are the ones who did not get to go home, who stayed here, and who are buried here. But the president making it clear how we see those World War II veterans, their bravery, their grit, their determination, their humble nature, really their quiet bravery all these years. And so much has been said about what happened on D-Day itself. But it's also important to remember that so many of these soldiers, these troops who arrived, continued long after D-Day and that victory. You saw Stan Friday, for example. He was one of the Americans presented with the Legion of Honor, 5 American veterans for that very rare honor. Only about 300 foreigners around the world have been given that honor before. And Stan Friday, for one, traveled deep into France and into several other countries. And it was his job to scout, likely with very few others, the danger that lies ahead. And he witnessed concentration camps that would later be liberated by the Americans. The bravery of those Americans and what they did not only on the beaches here in Normandy, but long after, before the war was declared over. The flyover is to come, and we will show you that as the morning progresses. But in the meantime, I'm David Muir here in Normandy. President Trump, President Macron, Melania Trump, and Brigitte Macron honoring D-Day and the World War II veterans who changed the course of history. For many of you, your local news is next, and Good Morning America, and I'll see you later today on World News Tonight. Good day.
This has been a special report.